Might be doing the course for Delta Township.
What kind of course?
A genealogy.
I'll talk about it.
Beginning genealogy course.
Really?
I saw it in their brochure that they mailed around. And probably most of you know him better than I do, but he, several months ago, presented his program here on tombstone inscriptions. And tonight he's going to talk about dating photographs.
Oh, I thought it was about dating in general.
You better change the program.
I'm out of that now, Jim, so you just wait.
Jim, do you need the lights down, or are you going to do a
I don't
slideshow?
need the lights down.
Okay.
I do need the microphone, I know. So when I get too quiet, somebody goes like this and I'll bring the microphone up a little bit. As Ford said, I've been a member of the Ionia County Society since a couple of months after it started. I saw a thing about it in the newspaper, so I joined right away. And I'm still a member, although I don't get to the meetings very often. I was the last one. I don't get there very often. We live far away in Lansing now. More about the thing about the field trip, I want to mention that anyway. I was thinking about it because it's a very good field trip. The Allen County Public Library is one of the top 5 genealogy libraries in the country. So if you get a chance to go there, it's really worthwhile. There's one in a town about 20 miles east of us. I think it's called Lansing, and they're in the top 10 also. So we've got 2 in the top 10 right within easy driving distance. Fort Wayne is much bigger as far as their genealogy collection than Lansing is even. Although Lansing's catching up, I think. It's a fantastic collection, and you can find stuff about everywhere. I have never gone there without coming back with 2 inches of photocopies. So it's a good trip. If you're into that kind of thing, you can just find all kinds of stuff. One of the biggest things they have there is a thing called Percy, and it's a periodical source index. And what it does is they've got genealogy and other related magazines for over 100 years from all over the world, I think, at least all over the country and Canada, and it's totally indexed. If you've got a name that you're looking for, you can look it up in that index, and then they can bring the magazine to you and you can see if it's your family member. And I found all kinds of stuff in there. So it's pretty neat. Tonight, though, we're going to talk a little differently than that. We all have old photographs sitting in the basement, sitting in the attic, sitting in the albums in the den, under the TV, wherever they might be. And I don't want to have a show of hands because every hand will go up. We all have photographs where we don't know who's in them. No names. I made a big mistake a few years ago. My mom knew people in those pictures. And I kept saying, well, I'll talk to her a little bit later and get this done. Well, Alzheimer's kicked in. That was the end of the pictures. So I have approximately 4,000 pictures, and 200 to 300 of them are labeled. So it's a problem. Now, I have been able to label quite a few, and recently I had my DNA done through Ancestry, and that has put me in contact with at least half a dozen cousins, new cousins. And I met another new cousin last time I was over here, Gary, and we are sharing photographs, and I'm sharing photographs with my cousins in different parts of the country. I just received 338 pictures from a cousin in California on a disc. And some of them are the same pictures I have, and he has unknown on there, and I know who they are. But he's also got a whole bunch where he knows who they are, and I don't. So together we're going to solve a lot of those mysteries. Now, first tonight I want to talk a little bit about the history of photography, because the history is very important to us. We need to find out from how photography developed where our ancestors are. And to do that, I've brought a few examples with me. Not an example of every kind of photo, because I don't have every kind. Some are very rare, and some are very expensive, so I don't have them either. But a general history of photography will help us identify some people. One example of that is a picture that this cousin out in California sent to me. He said, well, this is Alice Finley. She married Charles Quigley, who's my great-grandfather. And I looked at the photo, and I looked at the kind of photo it was, and I looked at the photographer. I said, no, that's not Alice, that's Alice's daughter. Because Alice had been about 50 when the picture was taken. And this is a teenage girl who looks a lot like Alice. Plus, I also have pictures of the daughter, so I know it was her. But by knowing the history of photography a little bit, I was able to determine that that was not Alice, and it was her daughter instead, even though they look very similar. Now, photography has been around since 1839. Before that, people did drawings of people, paintings of people. They would get them to stand all stiff with a candle on this side and a sheet of paper on the other side. They draw their outline. I even have one of those of my dad when he was a little boy, which was not back before the photography, but they would draw the outline. So you'd have a profile of somebody. Kind of hard to draw the face with the profile, but with just a black piece of paper. But before that, before photography was developed, we had paintings and drawings. And if the artist was really good, you have a decent likeness. Now you don't even have to be a good photographer and you can have a good likeness, right? I can get around, how many of you take pictures with your telephone? Those are not the best cameras, but they still do just fine taking pictures. I'm one of 2 Americans without a cell phone, so I do not take pictures with my phone. When photography started, it did not start in this country, and nobody claimed to have lots of inventions. But a guy named Louis Daguerre in France started photography. He figured out a way to make chemicals record an image of a person. That's kind of a new idea. People had the idea, but they hadn't figured out how to do it. And when he developed his process, we started getting images of people on another surface. Kind of like looking in a mirror. In fact, I grabbed the right one here. It's very much like looking in a mirror. It's like a mirror there, right? What he did was he had a process where he put some chemicals together. I won't go with all the different chemicals for these pictures. It doesn't matter for what we're talking about. But he had a silver-coated piece of copper that these chemicals reacted with. And they made a negative image on the copper, in the silver actually. And if you hold it just to yourself, it looks like a mirror. If you turn it slightly, you can see an image in there. When we get done, you can come up and, I've got 3 or 4 examples, you can come up and see what they look like. If you just turn it, or move your head a little bit, you have a very nice image. And some of those images are beautiful. And these guys have been around since the 1840s. They're getting fairly old. They're older than most of us. So it's an interesting process that he developed. Very cumbersome though. So people kept trying, of course, the human mind, we keep trying to improve the image, improve the process. And as time went by, we got into other kinds of photos. Some of my notes here. Shortly after the daguerreotypes started in 1839, they only lasted until about 1865, although now some people still make them today. They can go to the fair and get one or whatever, or specialist photo studios. But the actual process stopped about the time that the Civil War ended. So you do have some daguerreotypes of the Civil War. Another process started shortly after the daguerreotypes, about 1854 or so. And that's called an ambrotype. An ambrotype is also a negative image, but it's on a piece of glass. Now, I know there's some glass negatives that we've been possibly looking at or talking about later tonight. It's not the same thing. A lot of things were on glass. This is a negative image that's on glass, but what they did was they would put the image on the glass, and then they would cover the back with black, which would reverse the image and make it a positive image, and you can see the picture. It was kind of a neat idea. A little bit like how we do our pictures today. This is an example of an ambrotype. It's a piece of glass with an image on it. And the back of the image is painted black. So the negative image becomes positive because you add two negatives makes a positive, apparently. Because the negative and the black. That one I was very lucky with because it actually says who it is. Yeah, this says it was taken by Mr. Snell at a certain place in Ohio in 1839. Well, it wasn't developed till 1854, so it couldn't have been taken in 1839. This may be a copy of one that was taken in 1839, but this picture was not taken in 1839. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of those real quick. Here's another one. It's in the case. I'll talk about cases in a little while. This one is kind of neat, though. Yeah.
Now, are the images reversed? Like I've always heard that like tintypes, whatever a tintype is a reversed image. You're seeing like a mirror image.
These are not necessarily reversed. They can be. Just depends on how the photographer sensitized it.
Oh.
So they can be reversed, but they might not be. Now, I have a handy dandy little suction cup. And if you do a suction cup on a cased image like this, sometimes it'll come out, sometimes it won't. Do not take your knife and dig it out, you're going to ruin it. The reason I take this one out, because I want to show you what it looks like. There's our ambrotype. In this case, they did not paint the back of it black. They used a piece of felt. As soon as you put the piece of felt on, you have a picture. Kind of a neat way to do it. You take the felt off, you got a negative.
So are the chemicals on the material?
On the glass.
And the light activates the chemicals? Is that
Yes,
what
yes.
the process is?
Yes.
Okay.
This one also has a name too, which is kind of neat.
Jim, that's the light traveling through the aperture of the camera?
Yes. Sensitizing the glass image that's in the camera. Kind of like we all should remember film cameras. I still use film. I also have my digital one.
Where do you get your film developed?
Meyer still does it.
Really?
Yep.
What did that guy do in France to figure, to have that happen? Does anybody know what the story is?
I don't. I'm sure somebody does. He just had an idea and he kept experimenting, kind of like Thomas Edison. Finally came up with something that worked. He knew it should be possible, so he kept on working till it worked. I thought that's a pretty neat idea. This one here, which I'll leave out so people can see later, this is my best picture in my whole collection. It's an ambrotype of a lady in period dress. She was from the 1850s, so she's wearing 1850s clothing. But it's crystal clear today. 165 years later, 170 years later, whatever it is. And it's, to me, it's the best picture in my collection. So I'll leave that out where people can look at it.
What makes that last so long?
One thing is it's not been exposed to a lot of light. The cased image keeps the dark. That's one of the big things. If you have a lot of light on some of these pictures, they will fade. Or if you have, tintype was mentioned, if you have it on a tintype, it gets black. Keeps on developing. Kind of like a Polaroid picture. If you put a Polaroid picture out in the sun too long, it just keeps on developing. Pretty soon you got a black image. So here's ambrotypes. I'll leave these out later on, you can look at them. There were, as I said, lots of different kinds of photos. Now, before we get into any other types, though, I want to talk about something for identification purposes. When we want to identify our photos, we have to, one, figure out what the image is, two, compare it to images we have, and then there's lots of other clues we can have to help decide who's in that picture. One is the type of photograph. If it's a daguerreotype, it was probably taken before the end of the Civil War, so it's not going to be your own dad or mom, right? Most of us don't have any living relatives who were in the Civil War. I would be willing to bet on that. So, if you get certain, each type of picture was done in a certain time period. So, if your ancestor is in that type of picture, it couldn't have been taken before that picture was made, like this thing says 1839. It could be a copy though, or it shouldn't be after the pictures weren't used anymore. So you got a time period. One of the other things that you can look at is the background of the picture. Some pictures have backgrounds, like this one does. Other ones do not. Other ones are just the image of the person. So when you have backgrounds, it can help. I saw Gary just showed me a picture of a family, and the family car's in the background. Well, if you know cars well enough, you'll know that that's a, I don't know what it was, I don't remember what it looked like right now. Let's say it's 1924 Ford. So you know it couldn't have been taken in 1922 because 1924 Ford wasn't invented yet. So you've got a relative time period. If you can get a picture of the car where you can see the license plate, in Michigan you'll be lucky because not only if you can read the plate, you can tell what year the picture was taken, because normally 1934 license plate would not be, you wouldn't be taking a picture of it in 1938. So you got the year. Plus, with Michigan, you can get a book to look this up. But with Michigan, you can look at the license plate and tell even what county the plate was made for. Like, let's do the old 1960s plates around here. SK, right? SJ, and SL. And if you remember seeing pictures of those, or if you remember having them on your own 57 Chevy, you'll be able to tell by looking at that picture when the picture was taken, roughly, and where the car was registered. Doesn't mean the people in the picture were from there, but it's a good clue. Also, if you want to check an identity on a picture, one really good way is to know the photographer. This picture here, the reason I brought this in is because it's from Portland. It's R.E. Green, photographer, Portland, Michigan. And I went online before I came here, and I checked out a brand new book, which if any of you have been reading my newspaper articles, you've heard about it already. There's a brand new book online for a free download of 2,850 pages of information on Michigan photographers. And I've got a handout here, the website's on the handout, so I'll give you that in a little bit. But I looked at the Portland, Michigan photographers list. There's 25 Portland photographers between the time Portland started and around 1930 or so when this list ends. They are going to increase the list later, but right now, they're doing it by time period. They're around 1930 now. And R.E. Green, if I can find him here, Roland E. Green was a photographer in Portland from 1886 to 1897. So, this picture was most likely not taken in 1850 because he wasn't here until 1886. It probably wasn't taken in 1922 because he was gone in 1897. Now, sometimes the end is a little bit iffy because if a photographer moved on to a new town, they might take their cardstock with them and use it till it runs out instead of buying all new cardstock. So sometimes you find a picture that's after the date the person was in the town, but usually not by much.
When did the photographs switch to paper? Civil War?
Actually, a little before the Civil War. 1854, a type of photograph called the carte de visite, or visiting card, was invented, and that was a paper picture. If you were to look at the processing of pictures, around 1851, a process called the wet collodion process was invented. People trying to get better ideas on how to make pictures. Glass negatives were used, which is not what we're talking about with what you're bringing, you brought in. That your negatives might not be that old, but that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Glass negatives were made, and the big impetus in this kind of picture was chickens. Now that sounds funny, but the egg white from chicken eggs was used for the sensitizing agent on these pictures. So millions and millions and millions of chickens laid millions and millions and millions of eggs, and we got our pictures from them. Well, I don't know how it works, but the chickens were around and they donated eggs. There were huge chicken farms in Germany, special diets for the chickens. So you think now the chicken farm over there by Ionia Corners is really something. Really smelly, but really something. But they had the same kind of thing in Germany way back around this time. And their main thing was not eating the chicken. Theirs was collecting the eggs to get the whites to make the stuff for the chemicals for the photos. So the chickens were there. Later on, that process was usurped by another process. So chickens were less easy until KFC was invented. But after that, another process. But what it was, I can show you one here. I brought some. These are carte de visites. Now, the reason I have Moses on there is because all of these were taken by one of my ancestors in Trenton, New Jersey. But this is the size of the carte de visites. Visiting card. You would get these that are cheap. You could pass it out to your friends and neighbors, and they could put them in their little albums. Or when the president was elected, people would try to get copies for their little albums. So you'll sometimes find a picture of the president in there.
Do you have those labeled, those pictures, then when you put them in that little folder?
Mm-hmm.
Will you write on the back?
I write one little thing on the back, and I'll explain that in a bit.
Okay.
But yes, I do. After the chickens were tired of being de-egged, there's a thing called the gelatin chloride paper. That's what replaced the albumin from the chickens. It was easier to use, and it was a chemical that they could just make instead of having to raise chickens to do it. So photography changed again. The thing that happened mostly right after the carte de visites was the cabinet card. And the reason they call them cabinet cards is because people would put them on their mantles, on the cabinets, they put them in special albums. These were almost always in albums because they're small, they get lost. But you'll find these laying around all over the place. These are a lot more recent. They're usually from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they are quite a collector's item. The carte de visites are also collector's items. Both are in process. So you've got a negative, and a print. And what's nice about them is with these guys, you got one. With these guys, you can make 50 of them if you want. Like I was telling you earlier, my cousin in California and I are sharing some of the same pictures. We have the same photograph. Sometimes we have the same image with different photographs. There's one image that he sent to me. He has it labeled wrong. I'm sure I know who the person is. But he has one like this, and he has one smaller, and he has one larger, all the same image. not this image, but one of mine. And my one copy that I have is identical to one copy he has. So we have, at least 4 copies of that same photograph. Something you can't do when you don't have a negative that you can make a print from. So that makes it very, very easy to have multiple copies. There's another type that became very popular, and that's called the tin type, which was mentioned a few minutes ago. Tin types came around about 10 years before the Civil War, well, about 5 years before the Civil War, 1856 or so. And they were one of the more common kinds of pictures that were done during the Civil War, although these were all taken during the Civil War. And these are the most common, but tin types are quite common too. I have some tin types here. These are all tin types. This is a sheet of steel. You can bend it, don't do that, but you can bend it. And you try that with a glass negative. See how far it bends. You're not supposed to bend these, but these are very sensitive to light. You notice some of them are kind of dark. If I would leave that out in the sunlight, put it on my mantle and have the sunshine on every day, pretty soon I wouldn't be able to tell the image anymore. So you have to kind of be careful with these because even though they're less fragile than the glass, because you can bend them, you still have to keep them out of the sunlight. The paper ones can take a lot more light. Now, as photography developed, I already mentioned that there's lots of different kinds of photos. There's also different kinds of ways to display your photos. I mentioned albums. Here's a case that the photo came in. Here's the case that I was talking to you about a minute ago, this kind, or maybe a little bit bigger, a bigger one. This has an image inside. This is a tin type that's inside this one. You also can have this kind of image. Kind of a neat way to do it.
You can still buy those?
You can buy these on eBay,
I'll have
or
those.
through Photoshops and things like that.
They don't have admirers in them.
Not a buyer, no. These are a precursor to plastic. There's also oval ones. The oval one is kind of neat. It's got a little baby in there. And it's kind of nice because if you want to, you can do it just right. The oval one's not too easily, but this kind you can stand right up and look at. There's also the Oreo cookie. This is a kind of neat one because this one unscrews. You have to unscrew it. And then the image is inside. Some of them have an image on both sides. This one has one side. You just screw it back together and you can carry it around in your pocket. You don't have to worry about it getting scratched. There's porcelain type things, and you can also check your lipstick at the same time. More recently, there's this kind. You know what this is? Several of you probably do. Nobody?
A box?
It's for the newspaper or a book or something. It's for printing. Yes. Put the ink on there, slap it down, you got an image.
Oh.
Or, that's not exactly how they did it, but yes. The ink would get on there, and then the paper would be pressed
What they
against
call a
it.
woodcut?
This is not a woodcut, this is actually metal.
Oh.
A woodcut would do the same kind of thing, but this is actually a metal piece. Now, as we're trying to identify photos, and trying to preserve them, I'll get into preservation techniques in a little bit, but as we're trying to identify, we have to look at the styles of the day. The clothing styles, the hairstyles, especially for the women. Men's hairstyles didn't change very much. Men's clothing styles didn't change very much. So you pretty much look for the women in the pictures and see if they what they look like. There are lots of books for that. There are expensive books, like just for the photographer. And I've got a little bibliography of books I'll pass out here today. But this has, of course I went to a page with mine. This has images of different photos and explains them and gives the time periods so you can kind of get an idea of what people should look like based on photos that are guaranteed to be from that time period. So if you see somebody with, a man with a hairstyle that sticks out at the sides like that, you can look down here and you see what time period that photo is from. And most likely, if you find a man in your picture that has the same kind of haircut, he was probably taken around the same time, or he's old-fashioned and kept the style past when it was out of style. So there's this kind of picture. There's all kinds of books on dating photography. Here's one called Who Wore What? It's women's clothing styles in the 1861, 1865 Civil War era. So this whole book shows the different kinds of clothing styles that people would wear during that time period. So you can look at the pictures and see, oh, this is gingham dresses or gathered at the waist, or whatever the trait might be. And then if you find your picture, then you may be able to get an estimate of when it was taken. Here's another one on dating. There's just all kinds of on dating photos. There's also books on the cases themselves. This book shows lots of very pretty cases and very plain ones like what I have. And it gives, things fall out too. It shows pictures of the cases and the designs on the cases and when and where they were made. So if you have a picture in the case, there's a possibility that your picture is from that time period. However, sometimes people would take the picture out of a case and put another one in. So it doesn't always work. One or two of my cases here. Here's a good example. No, that's not a good example. Well, I had an example, maybe I left it home. Sometimes the front and the back of the case are different. That's because the case broke, and so they put a new top on, or a new bottom. And so usually the case will be the same on both sides. So if you find one that's different on both sides, it probably was cobbled together from something else. So it may not be exactly the time period that the case says it should be. So you have lots of different ways to identify time periods. One thing that happened in the Civil War is that the government started running out of money. And so they said, how do you raise money? How does any government raise money? Tax. From August 1st of 1864 to August 1st of 1866, the government put a tax on lots and lots of things. And when they did that, of course, the photographer was one of those things. Chemicals was one of those things that was taxed. And of course, what does the photographer do? Pass it on to you. So the government had a system where the photographer, to pay the tax, would buy revenue stamps at the post office. But it was not a photography revenue stamp. So they could buy any revenue stamp they wanted. And based on the cost of the photo, the revenue stamp would be put on the back. And when you picked up your picture, sorry ma'am, 2 cents more because of the tax. So the photographer would pay the tax by buying it at the post office and then pass it down to you, and he'd pay it back and it'd go in his pocket. So he didn't really pay the tax, you did. He was a middleman. He was the IRS agent. Now these Moses pictures I showed you a little while ago all have revenue stamps on the back. It's an uncommon thing, but if you go out to eBay, you can find anywhere up to 800 of them any day you want to look at and maybe buy some. So they are not uncommon, but they're not very common. I've looked through all my 4,000 or so pictures that are ancient in our family, and not one tax stamp. Not even one. These I actually got on eBay.
You found pictures of your family on eBay?
No, this is a photographer that was my relative.
Right, but still, yeah, it's neat that you found a connection.
Yeah, and we have documentation that he's my relative, so,
So how many years does that stand use? 4 years?
2 years.
Just 2 years they
Yeah.
did that?
Yep. Now, there are some, I'm not part of this conversation, but there are some that were put on as late as the 1890s. Supposed to be done in 1866, but for some reason, people kept on doing it sometimes. So you see the wrong stamp on there. Sometimes you see postage stamps when it's supposed to be revenue stamps. Sometimes you'll see other stuff. I've got one of my collection that's such an obvious fake, you laugh at it, but I bought it because I wanted to show it as a fake. Stamp, the picture was taken in Germany. It's got a US stamp on there for the tax stamp. No, that's not gonna happen. Somebody glued that stamp on to try to sell it as one of those Civil War pictures. But, so anyway, this one's kind of neat because this is part of the reason for the revolutionizing of photography. Before, people would get in their Sunday best, get there, and of course, they had to stand very still because the camera lens was very slow. And this kind of reminds me, they have a thing called the third foot in pictures. There was a little stand that would stand behind you, you rest your head on it, and help you stand very still. That's why you don't see smiles, because it's easier to hold a frown than it is to hold a smile. So, once in a while you see a full-length picture and you see an extra leg sticking out there from the stand. So that's the third foot pictures. When you come up, this bottom one here has a third foot. Excuse me. I was going somewhere with that. Oh, because of this kind of photography, which was easy to do, didn't require a lot of chemicals, didn't require a lot of specialized processing. It also didn't require people to spend a lot of money and to get completely dressed up for the picture. We all take pictures now of anything, right? I do not take selfies. I don't have a camera, cell phone, so I can't do it. But, you know, people take pictures of people doing everything now. Back a long time ago, you were always dressed up for it. When traveling photographers, these are all taken by traveling photographers, it says so on the picture. It says Excelsior Traveling Artists and Traveling Photographic Artists and so on. They would pull up, the train would pull into town, they'd jump out, take a bunch of pictures of people, and jump back on the train and leave. And people would be in their farm clothes, they'd be in whatever clothing they happened to be wearing at the time. So it was revolutionizing photographs, because now we get to see people how they really look, instead of how they looked when they went to church. A little bit different. Most of us, not all, because I see lots of blue jeans in church, but most of us get a little bit dressed up when we go to church. If you were going to get your picture taken and it was a big deal, that's going to be the one and only chance in your life, you're probably going to be well dressed for that picture. But when the things were revolutionized, tintypes and these things, people could wear whatever they want. So you'll find a lot of well-dressed people, but you'll also find people in their casual clothes or their work clothes, which is even neater. Now, we have all these pictures. Oh, I forgot one. You've all seen the stereographs, right? I'll get that out of the camera. All right, that's better. You can look at this when you come up if you want. Just hold it here and then slide this until it focuses. But these were made with special cameras with two lenses. And the lenses were slightly at different angles. Take a picture of the same thing at the same time. And then your stereopticon has two lenses in it. And when it focuses with your eye, it takes these two at slightly different angles and these two at slightly different angles and brings them together. They have a 3D image. And they really are 3D images if you've never seen one. So that's kind of a neat thing. Those were actually in use during the Civil War also. People don't know that. This one here, if I brought the right one, I did. You ever hear of President Garfield? This is Garfield's casket. So you can see what President Garfield's box looks like. Let's talk just for a couple of minutes about preserving, and then I'll wind it up here. We need to preserve our pictures, especially the old ones. I don't like to bring them out and leave them out. No, we don't have much light, so it's okay. But if this was a sunny day and we were outside, some of these pictures wouldn't be out because I want to preserve them. They're talking about a little problem with the library, about a collection of photographs. To me, and I don't know anything about the issue, so I'm speaking out of turn probably, but to me, copies of those pictures are what people should look at, not the originals anyway. So no matter where the originals are, whether the collection gets split up or not, which it shouldn't, don't split collections. But anyway, that's what the Governor Granholm did, tried to do with the Archives of Michigan. She tried to split the collection all over the state, and fortunately she lost that battle. But a collection of photographs, say in a library, people should not be handling the originals anyway. They should be handling the copies. If you go to the Archives of Michigan, you can handle the originals, but you're handling the original under the eye of the archivist with special gloves on. You know, it's a little different. They're watching, and they watch you like a hawk, because they've actually caught somebody trying to cut Abraham Lincoln's signature out of a document. They stopped the person from doing so, but they watch. So a lot of photographs, especially old ones or valuable ones, because they portray something important, should be copies that we look at. That way it doesn't matter really where the originals are, you know, as long as they're protected. Now, when you are trying to protect your pictures, you have to do certain things to preserve them. One thing is to use these kinds of things, which are acid-free, archival quality plastics. Now, plastic is sometimes a bad word with pictures, but if you get the right kinds of plastics, that's fine. They'll preserve it. I have these archival preservers here. Look at it, it's hard to see. It's these sheets here, and I've got one here to show you. I have, I'll just say 10,000, but I think it's a lot more than 10,000 negatives. And my collection has well over 40,000 pictures in it, so I've got a fairly decent sized collection. My negatives are in these sleeves that are archival quality. What I do is I take this sleeve, put the negatives in. Now you notice I have space here. The negatives were cut this way from the photographer. I'm not going to cut two right over here so that I have 1 and 2 and stuff, because they tend to get lost. So whatever the photographer or whatever the lab did, I keep it that way. I number the sheet. So I've got sheet number 30, this is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. On the photograph, I put, on the back of the photo, I put 30-1, 30-2, so I know where the negative is. And then I have my negatives in a special place, away from the photos. Ideally, they would be in a different building, but I don't have that luxury. I probably could, but I want to use them. So I put the negatives in the safe, and the pictures are out. Some pictures you can write on the back of. Never use pen unless it's a pH balanced pen. There are special pens for photographs. Use pencil. And if you get a certain kind of photograph that's glossy on the back and can't use pencil, this kind of a thing called Filmoplast P90 is an archival tape. It's a paper tape that you can put on there, and you peel it off later. There's no residue. That's what they say anyway. But it's supposed the National Archives uses stuff like this. And you can put that on there and then write on there about the picture. Put the name of the people, where it was taken, when it was taken, whatever you want to put. Now you have to be careful, because if you put it on a picture and you lay it on the table and start writing, And you turn the picture over, you'll see the dents from what you were writing. So make sure you're on a hard surface, or put this tape on a hard surface and write before you put it on a picture. That way you don't damage your picture. So something like this will be very helpful. I've got a little cheat sheet of here, so I gotta find it real quick. I did not talk about lots of different kinds of photographs, but I have handouts that you can read when you get home. If I can find my cheat sheet, I'll tell you this stuff about preserving them. Here it is. In order to protect your pictures, I'm going to read this. In order to protect your pictures, you should do the following, if you can. Store them in a humidity range of 30 to 50%, which is supposedly ideal for photographs. Too dry, they get brittle. Too wet, they get messy. Especially ones that have a glossy surface that can get sticky. Store at temperatures of 50 to 70 degrees. Well, that's fine until summer gets here. 50 degrees, basement's nice at 50 degrees. I'm going to read about basements in a minute. Store where there are no air contaminants such as grease, sprays, etc. So don't store them in the kitchen, don't store them in the bathroom. There might be sprays or grease in the bathroom, but don't store them where there's contaminants. Store them on metal shelves. I don't know if you noticed, but when I got all those pictures out, they're in a metal box. The box itself is not in great shape, inside's fine though. So, I always thought, well, put them on wood. But the wood has sap and stuff in it. Wood might have varnish on it, and some of those things can be harmful for your photos. So metal is the best, as long as it's clean metal. Don't store them in cardboard boxes or pasteboard boxes or on wooden shelves. Store in the dark or a near dark place. Well, that's fine, except you can't see them in the dark. That's why you make copies. Now, you're going to get this information too, so you don't need to write it down if you don't want. Use mylar, polypropylene, polyester, or polyethylene for your negatives. Polyethylene might be the best. This is a polyethylene type plastic negative preserver. Use archival quality paper, envelopes, and albums. Now, you can carry things too far. Those things are expensive, so do that for your best pictures, the ones that you want to preserve, and your family snapshots. If you put all these archival things on every picture, it's going to cost you $1 million. I don't think I can put 40,000 pictures in this kind of stuff yet, Laura.
Scrapbooking has acid-free, when you scrapbook, you use acid-free paper, and you've got the acid-free thing, so
Acid-free everything.
it's not as expensive as the other stuff, and it's pretty.
This is not acid-free. They might, those acid-free things will say acid-free on them, or they'll say no photocopy transfer, or archival quality, or something like that on there. This says archival 35mm negative preservers. Archival quality, no PCV, safe for long-term storage. And it goes on and says other things too.
I think they charge more to put the archival on there.
They do.
I think acid-free is cheaper.
Acid-free is what you need. Yeah.
I tonight bought some folders that do say acid-free on them.
This
So they
one.
are
Yeah,
available.
they are available. This one is not. They are available. Do not write on your photos or negatives with ink. I already mentioned that. If you must write, use a pencil or one of those archive or one of those pH balance pens. That kind of ink would be okay. And I already mentioned, don't dent your pictures. And I got 3 nevers. Never, never, never use polychloride, acetate, PVC. Thought that was just for water pipes or waste pipes. It's for this kind of stuff. Don't use wooden cabinets, pasteboard boxes, lamination, magnetic albums, basements, or attics. So don't leave them in the attic. and don't put them in the basement. It damages them. You know what a magnetic album is? My wife and I were married almost 39 years ago. In August will be 39 years. And this is our wedding album. And it's all rotten. Because it was put in a magnetic album before I knew about that stuff. You can go through and look at my wife and myself, and you can see all our pictures and stuff like that. But look at those pages. There's glue in there. And there's non-acid-free plastic and all kinds of other gunk that's destroying those pictures. There is a solution at Walmart. Used to be only at Meijer, but now it's at Walmart. You can't find it at Meijer. They're called Undo. Undo, used carefully, can remove pictures from magnetic albums. It can also remove some kinds of tape. What's it say here? Sticker, tape, and label remover. But you can free pictures from magnetic albums using this. So that's one of my next jobs, is to get those pictures out of there and into a proper album. So that's one of the things we can do. Now, I was asked Saturday night, or Friday night, wasn't it? Friday night, yeah. We were at a friend's house, a mutual friend's house Friday night. And I was asked about glass negatives. And I brought my paper about it. I printed a thing about glass negatives, which I'll leave with you so you can use it in the library. It says, how do I house and preserve glass negatives? Glass negatives are very fragile, especially old glass negatives. The emulsion might be coming off, and there might be damage to them, might be broken or cracked, and so they need special care. It says here, the obvious things: don't hold them by the corners, hold them like two edges. And hold them. So don't pick it up, don't pick it up like this. Pick it up like this, two corners, 2 edges. Glass plates should be placed on a table, a very clean table, and let emulsion side up, so the emulsion side doesn't touch the table. Don't lean on and don't press it on. Obvious stuff with glass. You don't try to bend glass, it's going to break. Never stack the plates while you're working with them. They should be stored this way, not this way. This way you're putting pressure on the lower plates. They should be stored this way. And according to this, every inch in between, they say to put some kind of corrugated, they're talking about cardboard, but I'd say acid-free something, corrugated something in between, so that they don't lean against each other too much and cause pressure. You can put the archival or acid-free paper in there between them to keep them from touching each other. Don't use this is something I didn't know, don't use cotton gloves to pick them up, because they can be slippery. They're talking here to use latex, or how you say it, nitrile, N-I-T-R-I-L-E.
But latex is fine?
Latex or nitrile gloves. It says non-vinyl plastic gloves. And this is from the National Archives. I got this right from the National Archives website. So it says here too, if you're gonna label them, label the sleeves that you're gonna put them in before you put the picture inside the sleeves. It even talks about different things about how to put them in the sleeve carefully, and where to, if there's a crease in the sleeve, how to deal with that. So there's all kinds of stuff here, and I'll just leave that. You can play with it later on. But glass negatives are a lot more delicate than this kind of negative. This kind of negative, I can go like this and play with it. I can drop it or whatever. I don't want to write on it or anything like that, but this is a lot easier to take care of. So preserving, follow what I said on the types of materials for it. Identification, look at all your factors in the photograph. The first thing I like to look at is, does this face match a face in my collection that's labeled? And I can at least help to identify. But before you do that, you might want to try to place the photograph in a time period. Remember when I said about the one, the guy thought it was the mother, but it was the daughter. Because the mother would have been 50 years old at the time this was taken, and it was a teenager. So, if you get your context right and your setting right, and figure out your photograph, and look at the hairstyles, and do all these little things, you have a lot better chance of success in identifying. And then if you take care of them properly, use your copies. This is the last information I have. My family has a few interesting incidents. This is my smiling third great-grandmother or fourth great-grandmother, depending on the line you look at. I have, my great-grandparents were first ones once removed. Oops. His father was the brother of her grandfather. So they're first cousins, once removed, because one more generation apart. And this is the mother of both those, his father and her grandfather. So she's my third great-grandmother on one part, and my fourth great-grandmother on the other part. But this is a laser Xerox, I'll say, I think it was a Xerox machine, laser photocopy of a picture that I took probably more than 20 years ago. And every once in a while I look at it. Of course, I should have taken two and put one in an envelope and stored it in the dark. But I can't tell any difference in this photograph after all that time. So because her color laser photocopy really worked, I don't have to get her picture out and show you. Besides her picture's a little one, this was easier to see. I can hang this on the wall. I can show it to people. If it gets dropped, it gets broken or torn or something like that, I can make another one. My original is safely set away, not in my basement, not in my attic, not on my wooden shelves. And so it is protected unless my house burns down, which I won't want to talk about. But this kind of thing can really help.
What about large portraits?
Large portraits, I would still make a copy of them and then store them carefully. Large portraits in the frame are easier to store because you can stand the frame up someplace and have it so it doesn't tip over. Large portraits not in the frame, you might want to figure a way to get some kind of a backing so that it's more sturdy and it doesn't get bent. I've got handouts here that I'll pass out right now, if there are no questions. But if there are questions, I'll do that first. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Like I said, I have the handouts. Come on up and look at this stuff. Feel free to pick them up. Don't drop the black stuff. But feel free to pick it up.